I've sort of been mulling something over, thinking about something that's sort of been bothering me, something that I see creeping into science, into maths, even into the way that we try and make sense of the world. And I wanted to talk about it, not in the normal way, not as a breakdown or an investigation, but more like a reflection, an echo of something. Now, to put it into context and understand why I kind of came to this, for most of history, science began with something simple: observation, curiosity, mechanism. As an example, Ampere didn't start with equations. He was looking at strange forces between wires. The same with Faraday. He didn't come up with field theory. He was looking at the lines etched in iron filings. The maths, that came much later, as a way of attempting to try and remember what nature had already shown. But somewhere along the way, that order quietly reversed. We started to consider the equations and the models more important than the descriptions of reality. And in some sense, it started to become the description of it. If something didn't fit the model, it was the thing that had to be corrected, not the model. And if you think that this problem is only limited to physics, well, it isn't. You see the same thing in maths, in essence, the language that we treat as the purest expression of truth. As an example, Russell's paradox. This shows that even the foundations of set theory, the rules that essentially define what objects and numbers are, collapses into contradiction when applied universally. Mathematicians responded by adding layers of rules and restrictions, building whole frameworks just to avoid the paradox. But the paradox never really disappeared. And I think this reveals something very important that we tend to take for granted. We sort of gloss over it. Maths isn't an absolute structure waiting to be discovered. It's a language. And the same as any other language, it's created with limitations and hidden assumptions that restrict it. And yet we often treat it as though it's more real than reality itself. That's what I think the danger is. That the moment we forget that our models are human creations, we in essence start to mistake the map for the territory. We build entire worldviews inside the margins of that diagram. And we become so confident in the internal consistency of the system that we stop asking whether the rest of the universe ever agreed to follow it. Now, it's also important to understand that as science evolved, the equations became more and more complicated. So we built machines to assist, to help us. At first, computers were just, glorified calculators. But now they're something else entirely. They spot patterns we don't, they filter data we can't, and the results are presented as facts that we trust. But I think the reality is that the reasoning behind how those results are obtained is hidden in decisions and code that we never really inspect. And I get why people are excited about it. In some ways, it's an incredible leap forward. But in other ways, it sort of worries me, because every algorithm starts with a human choice, an assumption about what matters and what doesn't. And once you weave those assumptions into the software, they're almost invisible. We just get the answers back and assume, well, they must be correct. In a sense, the machine becomes the memory, our memory. It remembers our biases, it remembers our blind spots, it knows our expectations, and it feeds them straight back to us. But somehow, because the answer comes from a computer, from a machine, it suddenly feels authoritative. We must trust it. It must be right. It must be correct. And I think we've reached a point where we're not just modeling nature anymore. We're almost modeling our own models. And the danger is that that loop keeps tightening. Each step confirms the last. And nobody quite knows where the assumptions end and the real science begins. I guess sometimes it feels like that the whole system is designed to reinforce itself, not to stand up and challenge anything. And to be honest, you see the same pattern outside of science, in education, in culture, in how we interact with information in everyday life. Now, in theory, we say that we teach critical thinking, but personally, what I think we actually teach most of the time is compliance. We teach children how to repeat the right answers back, not really how to ask uncomfortable questions. Now, when I was teaching, I saw this shift happening. The excitement of discovery somehow gradually being replaced with the pressure to get it right, to stick with consensus, to stay within those very narrow lines. And now, with the internet and social media, everything is moving so quickly that nobody actually has time to think properly. Now, I've noticed that this tends to push people into two different camps. One that clings to the official narrative. It's comforting, it's less effort, you just kind of go with the flow, but you don't accept anything that is not part of it. And the other stands almost the polar opposite. They build their own narrative and refuse to acknowledge anything useful in the other camp. Two ends of a spectrum, both extreme, but both missing that middle ground, the place where I think real curiosity lives. And to be honest, I think that middle is shrinking slowly, quietly, almost without anyone noticing. And that's, I think, how we stop being able to see clearly. Not because knowledge disappears, but because the process of discovering it somehow gets replaced with memorizing someone else's conclusions. And here's the part that no one really wants to talk about, because the things I've been describing, the models that verify their own models, the shrinking of curiosity, the belief that maths is somehow more real than reality itself, they don't sit in isolation. They reinforce each other. The more we trust the systems, the less we question the assumptions. And to be honest, the less we question the assumptions, the more those systems decide what counts as truth. And after a while, you're not studying the world anymore. You're studying your own description of it. That's the danger. Not that the model might be wrong, but that somehow we slowly lose the ability to notice when it is. Because once you're sort of buried in layers of abstraction and AI data processing that already filters through another algorithm and someone else's assumptions, with equations that stand in for physical mechanisms, and with a scientific culture that punishes anyone who steps outside of the framework, you reach a point where, in essence, you can't see the wood for the trees. Not because you're stupid, but because the trees have grown into a maze, a beautiful, consistent maze, a maze that feels safe simply because everyone else is walking through it too. And I guess in a sense, that's probably something that nobody wants to admit. If we keep going like this, then how on earth do we actually find our way back out? You don't drift into abstraction forever and then casually wander back out again. You get lost completely. But I don't believe that it's all doom and gloom. I think there is hope. And it lives in the place where people are still asking simple physical questions, where mechanisms matter more than equations, where someone looks at a system and can say, okay, But what's actually happening here? What sits underneath this? What explains the results that you're getting? A place where curiosity itself hasn't been flattened by consensus. So I've switched rooms for this second part. Welcome to the inner sanctum of See the Pattern. This is where I make the videos, where I write the scripts, where I connect ideas together. This is where it all really begins, in this small little room. Now, I know that the last section probably was quite heavy. I know you've heard me hint about it for years in videos, in interviews, probably even in between the lines. And if you're still watching now, the chances are that you've noticed the same drift, the same uneasiness, the feeling that something in science has gone, well, off course. Now, this isn't a sudden revelation. It's probably just the first time I've put all these pieces together on the table all at once. And thinking through it properly made something very clear to me. These types of conversations don't really belong on the main channel. See the Pattern is where I take ideas apart, where I follow the evidence, I look at alternative models, I analyze how the mainstream looks at certain things, and I ask the questions, does this logic actually hold? It's structured, it's analytical, and it's rooted in specific cosmologies, physics, and other types of observations. But in essence, what I want to talk about here, what we are talking about here, sits underneath all of that. This, in my mind, it is like a foundation. It's the mindset, the philosophy, the scaffolding that science has to rest on. And that's where I think the real danger lies. Because if that foundation drifts, it doesn't matter how good your models are on top of it. And I think those questions, those types of questions, are not the sort of thing you squeeze into a 20-minute breakdown. It's a different type of pace. It's a different type of video. You can't animate those discussions neatly. You can't tuck them in between a CMB anomalies or a plasma simulation. They need their own space. Something slower, quieter, because in essence, the situation that I think we're in isn't simple. We're really at a moment where science itself is drifting into its own abstractions, where curiosity is being eroded, where connection to reality, to mechanisms, to experiments, to observation gets thinner with every generation. And once we go down that path far enough, I don't think there's an easy way back. There's no policy tweak, no committee, no clever new model that will somehow snap you back out of it. And I also don't believe that the answer lies in burning everything down. I don't believe the solution is to pretend everything is fine either. There's sort of a middle ground. I think what does remain is much smaller than that, more fragile, more personal. I think part of it is an ability to speak honestly, to stay curious, to look at ideas directly rather than through the lens of a different model or layers of abstraction, to be able to talk about paradoxes, mechanisms, assumptions, not to tear it all down, but to somehow keep it connected to the world that it's supposed to describe. Now, I'm not going to say that that's enough to fix the whole system. No, that's really not what I'm going for. But essentially what we're trying to do, I think, is to resist the drift, to keep curiosity alive, and in a sense, it's attempting to keep that line between abstraction and reality, to prevent it from snapping. And that's why I think this space exists. It's not to solve everything, it's not to replace anything, but to hold on to the parts of science that matter the most: the freedom to think, to question, and to reflect. Even when those questions aren't tidy, aren't neat, aren't easy, aren't simple. And probably the way forward isn't going to be clear. So, welcome, truly welcome to this small corner where we can still slow down, think carefully, and attempt to push back quietly but very deliberately against a world that's somehow forgetting how to look at reality. And if that resonates with you, stick around. There's way more to explore. And before I go, a genuine thank you to all those people who support this work. You're the reason I'm able to slow down, think carefully, and to explore ideas that don't fit into the mainstream thought of how things should work. This channel exists because you give it room to exist. So genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.